Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rob Koyfin. I'm the founder and CEO of Koyfin. I want to thank you for joining us on this webinar today to go over the Koyfin tutorial. I hope everyone is staying safe and that you're okay in this crazy environment and that you're navigating the markets effectively. So a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, that this webinar is being recorded. That doesn't mean anything for you in terms of participating or being on camera, but we will send out a recording after this is over. It's going to be sent out tomorrow. So you can review the recording and go over anything that you've missed. There's going to be lots of content on this webinar, so our system is pretty complicated, there's a lot of advanced functionality, and we want to make sure we go over a lot of that functionality. My suggestion to you is, as I'm going through the functionality, don't click on the corresponding Koyfin functions. Just go through the functionality with me on the webinar, kind of see what I'm doing, and then later on you can go around and click around, and that'll be really helpful for you to go back and see the recording. If you have any questions, you can always email us. Our help email is help@koyfin.com, and we're pretty responsive there. I'm not going to be able to answer any Q&A during the webinar, but after the webinar, I'll see if there's any time for Q&A. The most frequent question that we get is the cost for Koyfin. So as you know, Koyfin is free right now. You didn't have to pay for it. And you might be wondering what's the catch, and there is no catch. So we're not selling your data or somehow monetizing your usage of Koyfin. What we will do later on is offer a premium version of Koyfin. So we'll have a free version, we'll have a premium version, and on that premium version, there's going to be more functionality, more data, more customization, and the price point that we're planning to charge is not yet determined, but it's going to be significantly lower than other comparable tools out there. So that's important for us to do. So that's kind of the question, a answer to a common question of cost, and hopefully that helps. Okay, so with that, I'm going to get started. Let me just set up here and share my screen. All right, so what you're looking at is obviously my computer screen. I'm on a large monitor, so this is gonna look different depending on what monitor you're on. But one thing to keep in mind is you should be using Google Chrome. If you're not using Google Chrome, you may have issues. So please make sure you're using Google Chrome to get all the functionality that's available and not have any bugs show up. The other thing that you can do is, if you're on a small screen like a laptop, what would be helpful is if you put the zoom on 80%, and if you put the zoom on 80%, you'll be able to fit a lot more information into the screen. I'm going to have my zoom at 100% for this webinar because I'm on a large monitor, so you'll be able to kind of fit everything. But that's something to keep in mind is the zoom, which you could do on your browser, again, to 80% will fit a lot more stuff. A couple of high-level things to mention. Number one is you can customize Koyfin to be this dark mode, which a lot of users like. So this is a more traditional tone where the predominant color is dark and not light, hence the name dark mode. I'm gonna be using light mode, or the original Koyfin, because that's what I prefer, but make sure that you understand that it's there. The buttons up here, I just want to highlight. One is the contact us button. This goes directly to us and someone will answer your questions. So pretty responsive there. Make sure you know about that. The other thing is this help button will bring you to our help page. And in this help guide, we have a lot of interesting information. So you could click here and see all the different articles that we have on the help page. And then one other thing to highlight is we have some social buttons here. So our Twitter account is here, LinkedIn, and then also our research blog, which definitely interesting. We write about kind of the most important issues in the market. We'll email this out to all our subscribers. The latest article is particularly interesting, where I go over the bull case and why I think the market is headed much higher. But what's important is not what I'm thinking, but actually what I'm looking at and all the indicators I'm looking at. So you could see it here, and we always link it to the Koyfin chart as well, which is pretty good. Another thing that you want to keep in mind is Koyfin does have a mobile version, and we don't have an app in the App Store, but we do have a app which you can put on your home screen via the web. And the way to do that is the instructions. If you go to the help page, so again, I clicked on help and I went to the help pages here. We do have an article here which says how to get Koyfin mobile web app. And then we show a quick video. It's about 30 seconds, and I'll just fast forward till the end over here. But after you are done with the video, let me see here, there it is. Get rid of this picture. This is my phone screen over here. This is my dog. This is my wife, and this is the Koyfin app. Kind of the most important things in the world to me are right here on my screen. But if you want the Koyfin app right on your iPhone, this is a way to do it. And we also show you how to do it on your Android device as well. Okay, so that's on the mobile side. Let's get right to kind of like the data. A big question is what data is in our system, and we have a lot of data on Koyfin. So there's a couple of ways to understand what data we have. Just on a high level, we're definitely a predominantly equity platform. So that's the bulk of our data. But what makes Koyfin truly unique is that we have other asset classes. So you can compare a lot of different things, not only equities. And one way to do that is in the search bar, we give you kind of the categories that you could search by. So we have equities, ETFs, mutual funds, indices, bonds, Forex, futures, economic. And so I can always search using these filters. And these are the different asset categories we have. The other thing to mention is in the help article here, we do have a data overview. So you can go through the data overview, which sort of lists the broad categories and how to think about them. And then the third thing, which is a little bit of an Easter egg, which you should know about, is we have this data directory. So if you click on data directory, we basically let you browse all the different economic data. And this is particularly useful for economic data. So if you wanted to look at kind of United States data, and I would then search for PMI, and I could go through all the PMIs in the US. So a really easy way to browse the data, but those are the different ways to browse data on Koyfin, and hopefully that gives you an overview of the data, which you can explore. Diving into the functionality of Koyfin. So let me kind of back up and explain how we've structured the system. So Koyfin fits on one screen. We're a single page application. So there's not a lot of scrolling. We wanted the Koyfin system to feel like an application instead of a website. And that's why there's not typically any scrolling. And so this is the main kind of area of analysis where you'll see stuff. And then this is the navigation. So the navigation is really broken out into three parts. The first part is something called My Dashboards. This is where you're going to create your own watch list of stocks or your own dashboard with a bunch of different fields. And I'll cover that in a second. So this is kind of the one of the most important things in Koyfin. The second thing second section is what we call category pages or cross asset pages. And in here, what we did was we took all the data on our system and we organized it so you could browse different parts of the market. So I could browse the market section or the equity section or the fixed income section or the macro section, and I'll go through these dashboards, but this is where you browse the market. And then the third section called security analysis, this is where you actually analyze a particular security. So here I have Capital One selected because I was looking at some credit card companies before. But this is where you input a particular security and you analyze that specific security. So that's sort of the lay of the land. Let me sort of jump to the category pages in today's markets. This is the home page that you're going to land on every time you start Koyfin. So the blue section means that I've selected this or this is selected. I'm now in the today's markets page. And when you see this section, you could do a couple of different things. So one is you'll see that these values are updating live. So that's a live feed that we push to you. You don't have to hit refresh. A common question is, well, what is the timestamp of these values? So for example, for the NASDAQ 100, right now 8699, when is that as of? And a really useful thing is to hover over this green dot and we'll tell you when that's as of. So right now this is as of 12/11. I'm looking at my watch right now, it's 12/11, so that's live data. So for the main indices, we show live data. derived from CFD contracts. So that's very useful. For a lot of the equities on our system, and these are represented by ETFs, the data is going to be live as well. So this is going to be 12/11, and as you look through these different ETFs, the data will be live, but you could always timestamp it. For the less liquid ETFs and equities, the data will be delayed. So for example, I'm looking here at Mexico. The reason I know delayed is that the dot here is going to be gray instead of green. So whenever something is gray instead of green, you'll know that it's slightly delayed and not live. So that's a pretty quick way to know whether something is live or delayed. The other thing in here is obviously I have this graph. I can add securities to this graph by clicking off these boxes. So right here I have my three indices, or I can select all my sector ETFs to put into the graph. So that's kind of useful. And let's say I wanted to look at it on a year-to-date basis, and then I can also scroll through these different securities to highlight them to see what's actually going on. So this is a really useful graph. A lot of our users will kind of have this on. They'll have the three indices, and they'll have the 1 day or the 5 day, and that way they're really tracking what's going on intraday. So that's a really useful feature and a useful function. One other thing to note, these little jump links, which we have for a lot of the graphs in the cross asset section. So what these jump links are going to do is they're going to jump to this section over here, the security now section, and allow you to edit this graph in a lot more detail. So let me hit that. I'm going to hit this section over here. And you can see that it took me to the IWM section. It created the intraday chart. And in this chart, I could now add whatever I want. So I could add Tesla or other securities. And so it gives me a lot more control when I'm in this section. This section is kind of a quick overview where I can't really add any security I want. The only thing I could do is add the securities on this page by checking off the box. But these jump links take you to the more detailed section where there's a lot more functionality and a lot more details for that section. So the other thing is if you click any of these tickers, so notice how these tickers are clickable, that'll do the same thing. So let's say I click on the technology ETF here. Notice it takes me to that section. It loads XLK here, and it points to the graph. And I'll go over how to think about this graph and all the functionality in this graph later on. So that's pretty much it on the high level in terms of the today's markets page with all the different bells and whistles there. Let me go now to the news page. So this is our top news section. What we do is we filter all the most important news from around the web. So this is your trending news, this is your latest news, and this is your tweet stream of Twitter accounts that we selected for you. In the future, we'll make this a little more customizable in case you think that John Nigerian is not someone that you want to see, or CNBC or whatever it is. So we selected this for you right now, but in the future, we'll let you customize that as well. Heading over to the World Equity Indices section, a slightly different layout than the today's market section. So in this kind of dashboard, what you can do is one, you can resize the graph to kind of like whatever you want. So notice here, if I wanted this to be kind of equal, I would do that. Same concept here, the dots select whatever's in the graph. So right here, I have my America's market section selected, and I can see the 5-year view or whatever it is, the 1-year view. You can also sort by these columns. So for example, if I want to see what's performing on the week, I can sort it by the week, and I could see that the FTSE here is leading on the week. And the S&P indices are leading on the week, and Bovespa, where there's a lot of political troubles right now, is lagging on the week. So quick way to do that. Notice here I also have some other columns, and what I'm doing here is I'm scrolling, and I can also add columns. So these are all the columns to add. Let's say I wanted to look at the quarter to date percentage change because that's important to me. I would just select that, and I could move that actually to the first field, and now I have quarter to date which I can sort. So quick way to customize that for yourself on how you want to look at different things. I'm going to skip the countries section. Countries is the country ETF, so you could see that by clicking on this eye. So this is the ETFs, this is the indices, which means the indices are local currency. The country ETFs are US dollar denominated, so that's the big difference. The sectors section, similar thing. We have the sectors and subsectors. The factor analysis is one thing that I do want to highlight. It's a very popular analysis in our system. So what happens here is we provide all the top level factor ETFs for you. And one thing to keep in mind is, and you can see this on the eye when you click on it, the factors, the way we represent them, are relative to the market. So you can see here the growth factor, IWF, is relative to the SPY, and the value factor is also relative to the SPY. So whenever you see the performances here, it'll be relative to the SPY. Again, we explain that in this little I section, but that's a common thing to make sure that's not tripping you up, is these are relative to the market, not absolute. And that's why when I look at growth versus value and I look at it over 3 years, obviously over the past 5 years, stocks are trending up, but these factors are moving in very different directions because they're relative to the market. So that's an important thing to remember. I'm just going to put my spotlight here in case it's easier to see. The next section that I wanted to talk about is the movers section. So this is also a very popular dashboard that's used because it's pretty unique. And the way this works is, now what you have here in the middle to the left of the graph is your series manager or your selection manager. And you have to select kind of the series that you want to analyze. So here I'm looking at the S&P 500. And what this tells you is the one-day return, but then we look at the relative volume of each security versus the past 10 days. And the reason that's important is, not only is it important when the security moves, it's important when the security moves on really high volume, right? So when we look at Simon Property Group here, it's down almost 10%, but it's down on 1.8 times normal volume. And that'll be kind of an important signal for a lot of people that it's down on high volume, similar to IVZ, which is one of the biggest laggards in the markets over the past couple of weeks. Invesco is up, but it's up on very heavy volume, so that's important. The other thing you could do is, so I have the S&P 500 here selected. I could select another index. So for example, I could select the NASDAQ 100, which we have here, but I can also select an ETF and see its constituents. So if I wanted to look at, let's say, the XLI for industrials, I could select the XLI, and in here, I'll then see the industrial stock. So if there's a particular ETF that you're interested in or sector, this gives you a good breakdown. One thing that I've been following over the past couple of days is the gold miners. So this is going to be a really important chart in terms of seeing which stocks are moving on the highest volume. So that's the mover section. I'm going to skip the rest of the macro sections in the interest of time. There's a lot of kind of functionality that you can check out on your own. So this is the equity section. We have fixed income, global yields, yield curves, corporate credit, fixed income factors. And then on the macro section, we have currencies, commodities, world economics, and economic calendar. So I'm not going to go through all these. Please feel free to click around and see what's going on. It's very similar structure to how we structured the other dashboards. All right, so now that we're done with the cross-asset sections, let's get into the security analysis. And for the security analysis, I'm just going to change this to Apple to make that a little bit easier. Once I have a security here selected and I go to a snapshot, a couple of things to keep in mind here. Number one is we have this quote box, which will give you some high-level information on the security, no matter which of these you're in. So this quote box is going to stay permanent over here. You can customize this quote box. So for example, I have all these different metrics in here, but let's say I wanted to put in beta versus SPX. I could move that to the middle here, and I'll show you. And it looks like this value is for some reason not pulling up, but let me pull up the 5-year Kegger. Maybe that'll be a little easier to show. Hopefully that's working. Yes. All right. And the 5-year Kegger. And then once it's in here, you can move this around and stuff like that. And after I'm done with this call, I'll see why this isn't pulling up, but you get the idea for different snapshots. In here, we give you a lot of interesting information that's high level, what you want to know about the stock. So the first thing is you want to know the chart, which you can kind of change here. I could also zoom in and zoom out with my mouse to control this chart. So really easy to do that. Then we have some high-level information on the stock. So some summary information, competitors, performance, valuation, capital structure, and consensus earnings estimates. Couple of things to note here. Number one, notice these jump links. So that'll take you to a more structured or more detailed section for these particular sections. Also notice that we have these underlines. So for example, if I click on this underline, it'll actually show me, take me to the graph where I can graph this. And let me just show you how that looks. So I clicked on PE, and what it did is actually showed me the graph of PE over time for Apple. But just remember, for security snapshot, whenever we have these numbers underlined, what that means is you could click on that and be able to graph the time series, which is obviously a lot more important than just seeing what the particular data point is. For financial analysis, we show you the major components or the major statements for the stock. So income statement, balance sheet, cash flow. So you can really kind of dig deep into the financials of this company. Our data comes from Capital IQ, so very high level, very professional grade data. So the source here is Capital IQ for everything that we do in fundamentals. Notice the quote box here is staying the same, but you can change this to trailing, quarterly. You can also change the way that this goes left to right or right to left. So some people like left to right. I like left to right. Other people, like my co-founder Rich, like right to left. But this is a way to change if the numbers are going left to right or right to left, depending on your preference. So you can go through those statements when you have a chance. One thing I'll point out on the financial analysis, very interesting. Whenever you have these numbers, you can also hover over these numbers on this graph to kind of see this trend. So that gives you a quick idea of kind of what's going on with these actual numbers. The estimates tab, very powerful, very differentiated from a lot of our competitors. Basically, this is an overview of what's going on with consensus estimates. So one is the average rating and price target. You could see the distribution of analysts here and what the upside is based on consensus. The other thing we show is the earnings matrix. So for EPS, we show the next 3 years broken down by quarter. So you could see what that is. Obviously very valuable. And then in the next section, we take this analysis and then we show you what the trend is over time. So for example, for let's say 2020, 1238, that's the number here, 1238. What we want to do is we want to show you how is that estimate changing over time, right? So over the past month, it's down 5%, meaning consensus, the average consensus estimate is down 5%. And over the past 3 months, it's down 5% as well. And the chart is a visual representation of what's going on here. So you could see here, this is 2021 or 2020, sorry, it's 1238. And it's down about 5% over the past 1 month and 3 months, depending on where your starting point is. So this is a visual representation of what's going on with consensus, and really important to look at what is the sell side doing, how are they changing their estimates, and then you could do that for the quarterly estimates as well. The other thing to note is in here, you could also look at consensus revenue estimates, so not only EPS estimates. So this is your revenue estimates or your EBITDA estimates, which is pretty cool as well. Moving on to the news dashboard, very kind of self-explanatory. You have your news, you have your tweets, where we filter out some kind of spammy accounts, but the tweets for the stock. And then we have your SEC filings, where you could also sort by different things, different kind of segments of filings, and then click on the actual button here to go to the SEC website. So a good way to have everything in one place for filing, news, and Twitter. All right, now that we looked at some basic kind of overview information and financial information for a stock, the next part is our graphing. And the graphing is really one of the most powerful things that we have on Koyfin. It takes a little bit while to learn because there's so much stuff, but once you do, I think you'll really improve your workflow and really kind of be able to dig into specific securities. So let me just close up this template here, and I'll explain what that what this is in a second. And sorry, let me just start with. This is kind of. I'm just going to add price here. And sorry, I'm going to explain how this all works in a second. Okay, so The way these charts work is obviously you have your chart and then you have your series manager here. This graph selection is controls what you see in the chart. So this is kind of like your controls, your center, control center for controlling what's in the chart. And so right now I have Apple selected and I have my historical chart in here as well, and that's exactly what's showing up. Now, you can add any data series that you want. We have about 300 different data series that you could add for Apple. And so the way you would do that is you would click on Add Data Series, and then I can sort of browse what I have here. So I can look at some market data information. So for example, I wanted to add short interest as a percent of shares outstanding. On performance, let's say I wanted to add the performance, the relative strength. And let's say I wanted to add PE. But instead of going to valuation and not knowing where P is, I could also search for it here. So I can type in PE, and it'll search all these indicators here, and then I could select PE. Whenever you see these two buttons here, that means we give you the choice of what to select. So you can select PE, LTM, or NTM. I'm going to select NTM. Let me do that. Let me go through my other. So let me add some other things. So let's say I wanted to add the average EPS estimate here for consensus. I could do that here. And let's say I also wanted to add the analyst price target. So I would type in target and I would add the analyst price target here, right? So now that I've added all these series, you could see this is kind of the chart that I have. One thing to remember is the options to change some of these series, or whenever there's options to change these, it would be by clicking on this gearbox, or actually clicking right into this tab. So right now I have my relative strength of Apple versus SPY. Let's say I actually wanted to change that to QQQ. So I would change that here. And let's say I wanted to change that to a gray line because that's kind of what I want. And so I would do that here. So now notice that Apple versus Q, this is Apple versus QQQ, and now it's a gray line. So make sure you know that whenever you want to think about the options or the different settings for these things, they're usually going to be found in here where, for example, for consensus, I could select NCM versus FQ versus FY and stuff like that. So now that I've selected some of these series, you could go further. There's kind of more advanced functionality by combining certain graphs or moving this around. So for example, let's say I wanted to, let me just get rid of this short interest because it's a lot of information. Let's say I wanted to combine my price target, which is 306. I wanted to combine it with my price because those kind of belong in the same graph. What I can do is I can move this graph up. So what I would do is I would move it up here. And once it's moved up here, in the legend here where it says analyst price target, there's a little button here. So what this does is this merges the series to the graph above. This merges to the series below. And this removes this series. So what I want to do is I want to merge it to the one above. I'll hit that. And lo and behold, these two series are now on the same chart. Now, let me switch that to 5 years, or actually 3 years, to get a better view. And because this line is super obnoxious, let me just make that a gray line, and I'll make it dotted. Okay, so now that's like a little bit better, right? So I have my price chart here, and I have my my price target, which is pretty cool. I have my relative chart here. I have my PE, and I have my earnings estimates. Let's say I just want to get rid of these estimates because, again, there's a lot of stuff. So I have 3 graphs. The other thing you can do is you can now resize this. So I can resize this to make something bigger or smaller. And so that's a very useful thing. Let me actually add short interest to just show you something. Put it back. Let's say I wanted to have short interest on this graph as well. So let me just merge it to the one above. Notice now when I put the this series to the graph above, what happens is 2 separate axes are created because short interest is in percent and price target is the price target for Apple stock. So what we did is we actually grouped the axis where appropriate. So that's a grouping function on the y-axis. One thing you want to do when you have a lot of series on the same graph is if you right-click on the axis, you could turn the grouping on and off. And if I turn the grouping off, what it's going to do is it's going to ungroup the ones that could be ungrouped. So these were grouped before because they're the same denomination, which is Apple's price. And right here, I'm going to group them off, and now they're all on the separate, all on its separate axis. And I could group those back on, which would combine these two. So remember, to know the group functionality, because it becomes pretty important. The other thing to remember is these settings. We have these settings on the advanced settings on the chart over here. So this will give you the ability to really change how the chart looks, how the different legends are displayed, how the y-axis is displayed. We have some mouse over functionality where you could turn mouse over on and off. If I look at panel 1, which is the panel 1 over here, remember this is kind of the shortcut when we had the right click action. This is more defined over here in the settings button, so I could do log or linear, or I could set the max and the min. So a lot of settings here, and so make sure that you remember that. Okay, so now that I have my chart, which is my Apple price target, my Apple versus QQQ, and my PE, what I don't want to do is I don't want to recreate this chart every time that I go to Koyfin. What I want to do is I want to have it saved. And the way that we allow you to save templates or save the basic components of a chart is with this concept called templates. And so what these templates allow you to do is to save the settings here so you don't have to recreate it every single time. So let me save this as my webinar April 20th template. And so once I save this webinar April 20th template, it'll live here in my templates. And I could just select it every time I come back to Koyfin. So let's say I start on my home page and I want to look at Facebook, and I go to Facebook, and here I'm in Facebook G. Now my webinar is selected, and these are some of the other templates I've created before this webinar. We start you off with a bunch of templates, so we'll show you kind of like what's possible with these things. But then you can create your own template. So you could either start with an unsaved template and create a template, or you can take a template and then save as another template. So I could take this EPS estimate template, I could save it as EPS estimate 2, and now I'd be able to just close this. I'd be able to add something else like short interest if I wanted to do that, and now that would be a separate template. So remember, there's a lot of stuff you could do with these templates to save them as something else, to edit them and stuff like that. The one thing that I will highlight that in terms of how these templates work, when I'm on webinar 20, right, this is my template, and let's say I add short interest to my template. It's now here. If I don't save this, if I don't save anything new that I've done to the template, that's going to disappear next time I come back. So if I added this and I didn't save it, if I go back to another ticker, that's not going to be here. To make sure to have this repeat or to have this save for the future, make sure you hit the save button, or else it's not going to remember. The one thing that does autosave on our templates are annotations. So if you have a template and you have a primary ticker, which is Facebook here, and I have an annotation like a circle here, or let's say I have a support line that I put in, these annotations are going to save automatically for a template. So because people draw annotations and it's unlikely they're going to want to delete them, these annotations are going to stick for this ticker and template combination. So make sure you remember that. Other thing to know is, again, you could zoom in, zoom out. So what I'm doing here is I'm zooming with my mouse, and that's automatically kind of creating, filling in the space. Oops. Little lag here. Okay. So you could zoom in, zoom out. You could also control it here in terms of the different time frames. Just move it here. The other thing that's really powerful is once you create a chart, very easy to share this chart or to print this chart. And the way you do that is over here. So if I hit save and share, this is going to bring a dialog box for you. And in this dialog box, we give you a bunch of things. So it's save and share, post to Twitter, or create an embedded snippet. So here on the share and save, I could download this graph. So if I download this, it would just download as a PNG to my computer. I could create a short link. So this would copy a link, and you could send this link to somebody else, and they would be able to open this chart without having to recreate this. And by the way, they don't have to have a Koyfin account. I could also post this on Twitter. So I connected my Twitter in here. and I could say like, this is a great chart. And if I would hit post to Twitter, it would just, I would just post to my Twitter account, which is pretty useful and pretty quick way to do it. Or I could embed this in a blog post or something like that. Another thing to highlight is not only do you have the functionality to download this chart or embed this chart, you can also edit this chart in a more advanced way. So if I hit this button over here, it gives me the ability to add a title now. So I could put in title. Let's change this to 26 to make it a little bit bigger. So this is my title. If you're a financial advisor or you're kind of a blogger or you write articles and you want to brand this chart with your own branding, you could actually upload your own image. So in here, I'm not sure what these, let's try Bull 2. If this was my, let's say this was my logo for my company. This is something I've used for blog posts before. So you can put your logo here with your logo name or your Twitter avatar, whatever it is. And once you download this, if I hit download graph, it's going to download it with this title and this logo. So a really cool way to brand it. Another thing you could do is right click on here and click copy image. And that way you could paste it wherever you want. So that's another kind of quick way and a shortcut to do that. So a lot of functionality, a lot of advanced features for you to create, edit, and use these graphs however you want it. One other thing to point out is in the series manager, so if I get rid of this, you could compare two different securities. So for example, if I want to compare Facebook versus Apple, I could do that as well. And what that's going to do is it's just going to add all these series here. So this chart is very messy. It's probably not how I want to look at things, but you can obviously arrange it however you want with these merge or create new series or up and down. So make sure you do that and arrange the charts however you want. Obviously, if you have too many series in here and the chart is too noisy, there's nothing that we can do about it. It just, you have to use your own judgment on how many series are too many and how many are not. One other thing I would point out is if you have an ETF in here, so I just looked at equities, but let's say we look at SPY, you'll have different series to add here. So for market data, we'll have ETF flows. So let's say I wanted to look at daily ETF flows. I could do that because I have the SPY here and it gives me some other functionality to look at. And then the other thing to mention is notice I have SPY here and some other functionality. Now that I have SPY loaded here in security analysis, I get this holdings tab, which is a special function for ETFs. And what this holdings tab does is it's really cool. We show you the holdings in terms of the performance, so historical price year to date. You could change this to 1 year or whatever you want, versus the weight. So obviously the bigger something is and the more it's moving, the more it's contributing to the ETF performance. And the other thing we do is we do this contribution analysis. So we list all the constituents here and we show the weight, the return. And then we calculate the contribution for you, which is the product of return times weight. And what's interesting about contribution is it's additive to the return of the ETF. So for example, year to date, the S&P is down 13%. And you can see Amazon, Microsoft are contributing 86 bips and 45 bips. And on the flip side, JP Morgan and Boeing are contributing 60 bips and 42 bips. So all these things are additive to give you a sense of what's driving the ETF return, which is really interesting. The other thing that we do is we do this contribution analysis by sector. Just reduce this to be able to see that a little bit better. So you see if I reduce the font, this fits a lot better. But if you look at the sector performance of the S&P, kind of let's look at it over the past 1 year. Tech and healthcare are contributing 254 and 196 basis points. Financials and energy and industrials are taken away. And you can see that the total here is minus 432 bips over the past year. There's a little unavailable or unclassified because of changing constituents and some errors, but that's a pretty good way to think about which sectors are driving the return of an ETF and how they're contributing to the strength of the overall ETF performance. The next thing I wanted to show you is a historical table, which basically is a table of the graph we looked at before. So you could flip through the data. The other thing you could do is download data to Excel. Just please note that some data is not available to download, especially fundamental data, because we have restrictions from our data providers, but you can download a lot of the technical indicators and stuff like that in here. We have intraday performance, which is pretty cool. So you could kind of look at how stuff, sensitive, you could look at how stuff is performing intraday. You can add different things here, for example, HYG and stuff like that. And then I can make these percentages if I wanted to look at it that way. And then remember, I could group these to have them be on the same axis. So really cool way to sort of see the intraday performance. And then we also give you a special graph called performance, because so many, obviously it's such an important piece of analysis. And in here, what this does is it gives you the normalized performance. So for example, if I look at SPY, HYG, Tesla, Beyond Meat, and Simon Group. So whenever I have my time frame here, 1 year, it all starts at 0, and then it'll show you the normalized performance. And then on here, you could sort of zoom in, zoom out however you want, and notice that the starting date is changing here. So this is a really fast way to measure performance. One thing I would note is that on the ETFs and equities, we show the total return of everything. So it's not the price return of total return. For mutual funds, it's total return as well. But for indices, it's the price return. We have this actually in this data overview section, or in the help page. You could search for that. We describe what we show as total return and price return. But let me just show you what that looks like. If I do SPX versus SPY, SPY is going to be total return. SPX is going to be just the price return. And you could see that difference is bigger as you go out, because the dividends become much more important. So just remember, ETFs, equities, mutual funds, total return, everything else is price return. All right, so that's the lay of the land for graphs, kind of the about 2/3 done with our presentation. We just have 2 more things to go over, which are really important. And then we'll be done and see if we have time for some Q&A. The command bar here, I used it a little bit, but the command bar is really important. It's really important because it really lets you navigate Koyfin in a much more advanced way and a much more efficient way. So the way the command bar works is, and this is similar to kind of a Bloomberg or other advanced systems which have a command bar functions. It lets you search for securities very quickly. So for example, if I wanted to find Apple, I could type in Apple here and it would find that. Or if I wanted to type in like energy and switch to ETF, it would tell me everything that's matching energy. Once I select something, so for example, if I select Apple, what I just did is I hit enter because I just selected the first highlighted item here, but you could also select whatever it is over here. Once you select the security, and you can see here I have Apple selected, we then give you the functions of everything that you can do with Apple. So for example, I could look at the historical price, I could look at the snapshot, I could go to the news dashboard, I could go to the financial analysis. And what's really powerful about this is once I know these shortcuts, I can then just type in the shortcut instead of really browsing for what I want. And we have the shortcuts here and we have them here. So for example, if I wanted to look at the graph of Apple, I would just type in Apple G and I would hit enter. If I wanted to look at the graph of Facebook, I would just type in Facebook G and I would hit enter. If I wanted to type in if I want to look at the financial analysis of IBM, I could do IBM FA, enter. If I wanted to look at Tesla's estimate revisions, I would type in Tesla EST, and that would get me to Tesla's estimates. So notice the command bar will always take you somewhere in here. So it's a quick way to find something in here. And it's a much more efficient way than kind of just clicking through different things. The other thing that you can do here is if you don't know the actual command, you could type in like Apple market cap, and we'll search all the functions that you're able to graph market cap. So in here, in case you didn't know G.mkt, you could just type in market cap and we'll just find that for you. You hit enter, and then we would graph Apple's market cap over time. If you wanted to look at Facebook's PE, I would type in Facebook PE. And again, we show the autocomplete field here. You could select it, and now we show you the PE of Facebook. So Definitely take the time and trying to learn this, the search command. It's really, really powerful. The one other thing I want to show you on the search command is the ability to create ratios. So obviously ratios are very important. If I wanted to look at Apple versus NASDAQ, I would type in Apple and I would do a colon. So Apple colon is the relative command, and then I would type QQQ. That creates an Apple versus QQQ series. And then I could look at the historical graph for Apple versus QQQ. Obviously, we don't have a PE ratio or price target, so these are grayed out. But if I go to my unsafe template, you could see that a little bit more clearly in terms of Apple versus QQQ. You could also do it for single stocks. So for example, if I wanted to do Walmart versus Nike, I can do that as well. And that will create the relative chart for me. Or if I wanted to normalize this chart, I could go to the performance and see Walmart versus Nike, and then I could do Apple versus Intel as a second chart. So it gives you a lot of flexibility to look at relative charts. So this command bar, super powerful. Make sure you you know how it works and you play around with it. The last thing that I want to cover in this webinar is something called My Dashboards. My Dashboards are probably one of the most, probably the most important feature or function that we have on Koyfin. So please make sure that you use it or you try to integrate it into your workflow. And so there's a couple of things which are really cool about my dashboard. So the way this is structured is these are all the different dashboards that I have. So these are all the different dashboards that I've created. We're going to start you off with 3 dashboards that we created for you, but obviously you can create a new dashboard here and I'll show you kind of how to do that. The other thing to remember is you have this menu here. So in this menu, I have all my dashboards as well. I could scroll through this. If you want to delete a dashboard, that's right in here. So let's say I wanted to delete no, I'm not going to delete any of these because I don't see any ones I want to delete. But if you want to delete a dashboard, it's right in here. You would just remove that dashboard or copy it or edit it. So just make sure you know that that functionality is here as well. Let me start a new dashboard and show you how that works. So I'm just going to start a new dashboard and I'm going to call this my recovery dashboard because I think the market is recovering. So let me do that. And you could see once I do that, it's my recovery dashboard is created here. And so what I can do is I can then add securities here. So I'm just changing this to this valuation. What I can do is I can add securities here. So let's say I think Freeport is going to be recovering and Apple and Virgin Galactic and let's see, Newmont Mining, was it Newmont? I'm blanking on names. Let's do IBM as another stock. So these are all kind of the stocks that I inputted. You could input them one by one. Another thing that you can do is you can copy paste a list of tickers from Excel. So if you have a list of tickers from your broker or an Excel sheet, that's a really fast way to do that. What you would do is you would actually just paste them into here. In the help article, we have a help article. If you just go back to the dashboard and you search for CSV, we have a really quick tutorial on how to take a ticker list and then put them into a dashboard. I'm not going to do that right now, but just remember you could do that, and that's something that a lot of people want to do. So now that I have my list of stocks, I could do a couple of things here. So one is I can control this graph with these buttons over here. So I could graph Apple, or I could graph SpaceX, or I could graph IBM. And notice this is a pretty simple graph in terms of my price graph. What I can do is I could select another graph to display here. So I could select a normalized graph, or I can select anything that I created in my template. So remember, we created the webinar April 20th template with my price target, my relative performance, and my PE. So now I could pull that up here. So notice these labels are getting a little in the way. I'm just going to take these labels off over here. And now I could sort of cycle through all my stocks. So I could cycle through Space, I could cycle through Apple, I could cycle through FCX. So this is a really, really cool and fast way to look at all the stuff, and we give you the news highlights over there. If you wanted to see a bigger chart, you could do that as well and see it over here. So it gives you a lot of space to flip through your charts and to kind of see what's going on. The next kind of powerful thing on my dashboards that I wanted to cover are these views. So if I just maximize this, I'm just going to maximize this table over here. Notice that I have a bunch of fields here. And so these fields are the data that's in Koyfin. Remember the 250 or 300 data fields that we have in Koyfin? You could put them all in your dashboard. And the way that you put them in your dashboard is through this views column. So right now I have all these different views set up. So for example, I have my technicals 2 view with a bunch of stuff. What you can do is you can create your own view. So I'm just going to start my own view. I'm going to create a view called valuation evaluation. That's my view. And then remember in here, I could browse different things. So I could put in the security name and it pops up here. I could put in the sector, it pops up here. I could put in the next report date, it pops up here. I could go here through the market data and I want to look at last price. I want to look at the 3-year total return. I want to, let's say, look where it is in the 52-week range by looking at the percentile. And then in valuation, I want to look at NTM, NTM, so all these things. And let's say I also wanted to search for the analyst price target. I don't know where that is. I could do that here. And so again, we're going to search all these fields for you, and I'm just going to put maybe percent above below price target over here. Now this is my valuation evaluation. I'm going to save this view, and now that becomes one of the views that I could select. And so whatever dashboard I then look at, so for example, let's say I look at the hotel and leisure stocks, I could then select my valuation evaluation view, and I'm going to have all the columns that I created. So to the extent you're a fundamental investor or a technical investor or both, you could select different columns and create these views, which are really, really popular. So make sure you understand how to do that. The last thing that's really powerful on dashboards is the ability to share a dashboard. So for example, I created a dashboard called Recovery. And for some reason, this dinky dashboard with 4 stocks is something I'm very proud of, and I want to share it with my colleagues. What I then will do is I will click on Share Dashboard. I will turn this on, and I will send this link to my colleague. So once I send this link to my colleague will open up the link, and your colleague does have to have a Koyfin account. But once your colleague opens up the link, there'll be a follow button here. And once your colleague follows it, he or she will then have this follow dashboard list as well. So these are the dashboards that somebody followed with me. So Rich followed his dashboard with me. Howard Lindzon followed his dashboard with me. So let me click on Howard Lindzon watch list. And so this is stuff that Howard Lindzon is monitoring. Now I can't delete this dashboard because I'm not the owner of it. I'm not creator. So if I click on the X, I'm not allowed to delete anything from Howard's dashboard because I'm following it. To the extent that Howard deletes something, that will automatically update in my view. So let's say Howard stops following Shopify because he doesn't care about it anymore. He would delete it, and then it wouldn't show up in my dashboard as well. So make sure you know how these follow dashboards work, and don't forget this menu item here where you can. Let's say I wanted to actually edit Howard's watch list. I could then clone it or duplicate it, and I would create copy of Howard's watch list. And then because this is now my dashboard, it's not Howard's dashboard, I can delete Shopify, or I can delete Tesla, or I can do whatever I want with this dashboard because now it's my dashboard. So that's a really useful way if you're working with a team of people to do this sort of stuff. Okay, so I believe that's it for the prepared remarks. Let me just gather the Q&A, see if anyone has any questions, and then we can go from there. So if you have a question, make sure you just put it into the Q&A. I see a bunch of you are raising your hands. There's a Q&A dialog box. So try and Okay, I am sorry, everyone, but it looks like the Q&A, for some reason, the settings weren't properly set up. I apologize for that. If you have a question, email us help@koyfin.com. I promise one of us will respond to it. So you can email help@koyfin.com. We will respond to your questions, and I apologize that we can't answer any questions right now. But let's do it through the help desk through help@koyfin.com, and we'll be very glad to answer your questions. So again, I appreciate you taking the time on this Friday to go over this webinar with us. A lot of stuff here. I know a lot to digest, but the more you use Koyfin and poke around, I think the more you'll find. And I hope it's useful and productive to your workflow. Thanks, everyone, and have a good day.